Most people who use a Whoop band, an Aura ring, or any other kind of wearable generally know that a higher HRV is favorable, but they don't necessarily understand what that number means. Typically, they'll wake up, see that their HRV's dropped, and immediately start wondering, do they sleep enough? Was training too hard? More importantly, should they change anything because of it? So HRV is useful in that it gives us a window into how your nervous system operates and responds to the demands that you put on your body, but only when you know how to interpret it correctly. So in this video, I'm going to explain what HRV actually tells you, why it matters to your recovery and long-term well-being and health, and what I'd look for first if we're trying to actually improve it. Just to give you a definition of what HRV is, it stands for heart rate variability. And that variability is a good thing. Even if your heart rate is at 60 beats per minute, that doesn't mean that there is exactly 1 second between each of those beats. There might be 0.9 seconds difference between two beats, 1.1 seconds between the next two, and HRV measures that variability, that difference between those beats in timing. The reason this matters is that the timing between your heartbeats is influenced by your autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system controls many of the processes happening in your body without you consciously having to think about them. So that includes things like your heart rate, your breathing, your digestion, blood pressure, and other various aspects of your stress response. Broadly speaking, one side of the system helps you mobilize when there's a demand placed upon it. And this could be a high pressure meeting that you have, an important decision you need to make, a demanding training session, or anything else that requires you to become much more alert and focused. The other side helps slow things down and supports things like digestion, restoration, recovery. People often describe these as the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system. The important thing is to recognize that you need both to operate and perform as best as you can. And the objective here isn't me telling you that you need to remain completely zen and calm the entire day, but you need to be able to increase your levels of activation when there is something important to deal with. But once that demand has passed, your body should also be able to move back towards recovery. It should be able to switch between performance and being in a much more restorative state. And a well-regulated nervous system is able to move between those states appropriately as and when. And HRV gives us some insight into that ability. And so when you're resting and recovering well, there is generally more variation between your heartbeats. So you have a higher HRV, a higher variability. But when your body is dealing with a greater psychological strain, that variation will often decrease, hence giving you a lower HRV. And that strain could be coming from insufficient sleep. It could be coming from alcohol, which cuts into your restorative stages of sleep, illness, travel, hard training, various psychological pressures and strains you may be going through, or a combination of all these different variables. HRV therefore gives us a better understanding as a signal of how your body is responding to its current load, and it's a good indicator of that. The HRV doesn't regulate your nervous system itself. It just reflects part of what your autonomic nervous system is doing in that moment of time. And the reason why this matters so much for your health and well-being is that a healthy nervous system is not one that never experiences stress. It's one that can respond to stress in a much more flexible manner and then recover from it. The problem begins when demands being placed on your body repeatedly exceed your ability to recover from them. So you may start to see a lower HRV alongside a higher resting heart rate. Those two tend to work in tandem, as well as disrupted sleep, lower energy, poor training performance, and a feeling that you're constantly in this switched on sort of state. And that's why nervous system regulation matters. It's your ability to move between pressure and recovery. And that influences how well you can continue performing without accumulating excessive recovery debt. And across population research, lower HRV has been associated with poorer cardiovascular outcomes and greater health risk. And that doesn't mean a low score from your wearable one night is diagnosing a health problem. It just means that autonomic regulation is a meaningful part of your health, and HRV gives us one easily accessible way to observe it. So how to interpret your HRV properly? There are three things you need to understand before changing anything else. The first is that you should compare your HRV with your own baseline. It's a very personal, individualized metric. Someone with a HRV of 70 is not automatically healthier or better recovered than someone with a HRV of 40. HRV can differ considerably between individuals based on age, genetics, fitness, health, measurement method, and various other factors. So the important question is whether your HRV is normal for you. So understanding what your baseline is. The second principle I'd look at is to look at the trend rather than one isolated reading. Looking at a score across one isolated night doesn't tell you much, but seeing it drop over a series of days and weeks is much more important. So one low morning could reflect a very hard training session, a late meal, alcohol, a poor night's sleep and recovery. But that information isn't enough to reach any kind of meaningful conclusion. I become more interested when someone's HRV remains below their normal range for several days, continues falling, or repeatedly drops after the same behavior. So for example, when I've worked with clients in the past and I've seen HRV take a dip from the regular baseline across a few days, that's when questions need to be raised as to whether training load is too excessive for the current week's demands. Is work stress increasing? Are there any other pressures that we need to consider or factor into when we're creating a program? It's those kind of things we need to be thinking about. I would also look at interpreting HRV alongside other information, and that's the third principle. I'd look at things like resting heart rate, your sleep, training performance, energy, generally how sore you are after training as well, and how you feel overall. So, for example's sake, a lower HRV alongside an elevated heart rate, resting heart rate, and poor sleep gives us much more useful information than lower HRV by itself. So now the question is, how do you improve your HRV? Well, the mistake here is trying to increase that number directly. People see a low HRV and immediately search for things like breathing techniques, supplements, and recovery devices that will push it forward. But the objective here is not to manufacture a better wearable score. In fact, it's to improve your underlying ability to deal with stress and recover from it. And by doing so, you need to find the largest constraint that's holding you back. For most people, it's understanding how you'd protect sleep opportunity and consistency. For most people, I would protect your sleep opportunity and sleep consistency, the sleep and wake time consistency, giving yourself enough time in bed and keeping your wake times reasonably stable across the week. Giving your sleep just the same kind of importance like you would anything else in your day. This doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, but you do need a routine that provides you the opportunity to get restorative sleep on most nights. Now we have to look at alcohol, and we have to be very honest about how much you're consuming across the week. Look at your data rather than relying on how you think alcohol affects you. You may feel functional the next morning, while your resting heart rate and HRV show that your body experienced a meaningful psychological cost overnight. And that accumulates over time. Then I'd look at your training. Don't automatically stop training because your HRV is low for one day. Look at the trend, how you feel and whether your performance has changed. But if HRV remains suppressed, your resting heart rate is elevated and your performance is failing, that may justify adjusting your training volume or intensity temporarily. And that's something that we do when we work with men who have those weeks that are much more straining than others. It requires a good eye for understanding how do we change that workout or the programming for that week. A practical way of looking at it is placing the hardest session late in the evening after an already demanding day makes it harder to transition towards a sleep and recovery. So moving that session, finishing earlier, or choosing a lower intensity session on the most demanding work days can be a better decision overall. And over the long term, developing your cardiovascular fitness can also improve your autonomic regulation and HRV. Exercise training has been shown to improve several HRV measures in healthy adults, although the response depends on the person and the type of training. Breathing exercises, walking, and creating a deliberate transition out of work can also be useful. Not knocking it, but it's a good supplementation rather than that being the main fix. But they're there to support the fundamentals rather than replace them. So here's what you can do. Open the last 2 weeks of data from your wearable, find the days where your HRV has been noticeably below your normal range, below your baseline, and then look at what happened the day before. Start with 3 things. How much opportunity did you give yourself to sleep? Did you drink or consume alcohol? And what kind of training did you complete? How much strain did you put on your body the day before? And then you're looking for a repeated pattern. Once you find the most obvious one, change that variable the following week. Don't change all of these variables simultaneously because you'll have no idea which one actually made that difference. And continue to look at HRV alongside your resting heart rate, your sleep, energy, and how you feel when it comes to performance. HRV, again, is very useful because it can show how your body is responding to the demands being placed on it. But don't think the idea here is to get the highest possible score or chase a perfect score. The goal is to use that information to make better decisions about your sleep, training, and recovery. So, if you have any other questions on HRV, how to improve it, and what kind of things that might be affecting it, please drop me a question in the comments. But otherwise, I'll catch you in the next video.